Well, let me begin this morning by sharing with you two stories. One story is my story, and the other story is your story, sort of my story. And the first story began, for us, it really began on Labor Day, when on Labor Day we were kind of gathered around. I think I was watching television, actually, at the moment, and I received a text from my brother in western Nebraska, a rather obscure and oblique text, which didn't make a lot of sense, but then a lot of what my brother says doesn't make sense to me. And it came through, and it just simply said, "at the ER." Okay, at the ER. And then later on, it added, maybe an MRI. Well, I was thinking either he was obsessed with abbreviations and initials that day, or something serious was happening, but you can't always reach him, and obviously it's him that's in the emergency room, and we're trying to figure this out and know what's going to happen. Well, it was an hour, 2 hours maybe, till we got a hold of him, and when I talked to him, he sounded perfectly normal. I mean, it was actually quite a casual conversation, and I said, "An MRI, Stan? Why are they doing an MRI?" He says, "Well, I had an aneurysm, and it burst, and there's been bleeding in my brain." And I said, this was on Monday, and I said to Stan, "Well, when did this happen?" He said, "Oh, Friday." You got to understand my brother. So he had gone 3 days with this thing, which is a little concerning, and then again, not, because obviously he'd made it 3 days. Well, at that point, they're waiting. They wanted to have a helicopter take him from western Nebraska to Denver, where they have a great stroke hospital, but the helicopter couldn't come because of the fires. Because out west they've got multiple fires, and if you're in Denver right now, they have quite a cloud around the mountains up and down. And so they were going to send a Learjet, and then someone else had a heart attack in the mountains, and the Learjet went there, and so eventually they sent out a turboprop plane, which seems more appropriate for Scottsbluff anyway, and carried him into Denver and took him to Swedish hospital. Well, as you can imagine, while that was happening, we were at home watching the same news you were and trying to figure out, what do you do, and do I go, and what's going to happen with Irma? And I'm very grateful for my wife and my family who were courageous enough and faithful enough to say, "Keith, you need to go." And so I caught a plane the next morning and went out to Denver, and of course, once in Denver, I was kind of stuck. Right? I was kind of stuck. Well, the good news is he's fine, and on Friday he was discharged from the hospital. Thursday evening I came home, and considering everything in his case, we were, I would say, extremely lucky. Your story, right? Your story, because I was in Denver, I can't claim it fully as my story because I only got what was on the news. And I honestly believe that the news finds I think they set up fans sometimes just to create the air and the wind as horrific as they can. But it's scary sometimes, scarier probably to watch, because I talked to Jean, she said, "It's sunny here." And I said, "Oh man, that's not what I'm seeing on TV." But anyway, they're watching it, I'm watching it, there's not much you can do, and the tracks, the spaghetti tracks, they were all over the place, right? And you didn't know, and then really until a few hours before the storm, it switched, and this place was kind of saved. My son said, the police department, he says, "Don't tell your mom, but it's supposed to hit St. Pete Beach." And the news in Denver was always about Tampa. It was always about Tampa, but he said, and then it switched, and we were spared. So in that whole time, I'm anxious. I'm anxious for my family, my loved ones. I'm anxious for you folks, and what that means. I'm anxious for the church and what that means, and there's not much any of us can really do. You think about it as a minister, I'm thinking about, is there going to be anything left? How many people are going to not rebuild? How many people are going to leave? Would there even be a congregation? Where would we worship? What would the next few years be like? Or would this church be done? Now, you may have not shared all of these thoughts and feelings with me, but I am willing to bet that you shared some of them, right? And it makes you stop and it makes you think, doesn't it? I mean, there's a point where in the midst of all that crisis, where it could all be gone, what you have to do is reevaluate and reprioritize everything. If it's all gone, what isn't gone? The future, and besides the future, what else? People. It really reminded me of something we all intuitively know, that in life, the most valuable gift, most precious thing we have is each other. People. When you have the storm coming, you can lose your house, and that's tragic. We could lose the church, and that's tragic. We could lose the city, and that's tragic. But the most tragic thing that could happen is if we lose the people around us. It is so clear in situations like that. And it doesn't even matter. Think about this. I mean, we don't want to lose our loved ones, but really, we don't want to lose anybody. We have that fear and that concern and that love for even the stranger. People are the most important. I had this one, God forgive me, I had this one moment, I thought, well, God, if it's going to hit anywhere, send it to Houston, because they've already been hit. I know, I'm probably going to burn for that, but there was a moment that said they've already got it, so why ruin another place? And so when push comes to shove, it's people and it's relationships and it's the love we share that really is significant. And the rest of it is all stuff. I mean, even the stuff you take with us is what? It's probably pictures and memorabilia that remind you of what? People. People. It's all about people. Which begs us to ask, why are people so important in the first place? Why do we work and worry and slave so hard to get all this other stuff and then try to hang on to it when in the final analysis, it really isn't that important? It isn't that important. Similarly, this raises up the importance of people when we see how much we scramble in these times for advice and for assistance and for help in cleanups, in getting out of town. People would call other people up and say, if you need somewhere to come stay at our house. Yesterday when Jean and she mentioned when we came by the church, we talked to the people out here. They were from outside of St. Louis in Illinois, and they immediately came here. And you've seen crews from everywhere. The people who electrified our house again were from Vancouver, British Columbia. 6,000 miles, they said they came to get here. And I understand they get paid. They get reimbursed. I understand that, but still they're away from their families, they're away from their homes, they're working like crazy. And it makes me realize how much people are important to people. And this church has done that. When Katrina happened, we sent people there, and we've had people go to people, and you ask why? Well, why does the church do that? Well, when we needed it, we'd be more than happy for those people to come here, right? People, again, are at the heart of life and should be the highest of priorities. We've gone to New Orleans and Alabama and other places, and now those people come here. You see, when crisis strikes, what happens is we set aside all our differences. You ever think about that? You set aside all your differences with other people. They don't matter. They're insignificant. They're inconsequential. They too are just stuff. The person bringing electricity to my house or rescuing me from a flood could have had 3 heads, 5 eyes. I wouldn't care. They could have played for the University of Oklahoma and I'd welcome them. It's not important. I'm just glad they're there. In fact, if they had 6 arms, it might go faster. So the question again comes, when all the other things that we fight and we fuss and we divide ourselves about, if they don't matter at those times, why do they matter at other times? Everybody does better when everyone does better. There is so much more to all of us, friends, than our education or our professional background or our race or our gender or our age, where we live, who we know, how we worship, where we come from. Those things are all secondary, humanly made divisions. And the blessing of a crisis is we find out what our real priorities and what really is valuable. And it's sad because I think intuitively we know all of this. It was Leonard Sweet, a theologian and preacher in the Methodist Church, and this has stuck with me. He says, when you go through life and you deal with other people, you always have the choice of being right, I'm right, or in relationship. You know, in crisis, it's about the relationship. But then it always was. Everything else, loving, helping, caring for, laughing, enjoying people, that's the gifts. The rest is gravy. And we should give thanks and appreciate it, because all the stuff that we fuss and fume and worry about, all the other stuff is just stuff, and it was never meant to last forever anyway. And for that matter, we weren't meant to last forever either. Which brings me to my final thought. Did anyone here, for even a brief moment, have a fear that they would have no home to return to? Did anyone here have to find another place to go, some other shelter, a friend, a family, anyone else? I was flitting around from house to house, seeking shelter, a bed, mostly air conditioning. We had family nearby, which was helpful. But if you don't have family or you don't have friends, then what? Some people told us they left here and went to Atlanta. And when they got in Atlanta, they said, well, the people in Atlanta figured out that the people in Florida that are evacuating put everything valuable they have in their cars. It's no fun being a refugee. It's no fun being a refugee. And if we had any of those kinds of feelings about what's it like to lose your home, what if I don't have a home, if I go somewhere, is somebody going to take from me the very little I have? I think it sensitizes us, or it should sensitize us, to people around the world, either to natural disasters or human tragedies, who are placed in exactly the same position, not by their own choice, but by situations out of their control. What's it like not to have a home? And would you do anything to come back to it if you could and rebuild, because it's your home? When Gina and I were in Paris this summer, we saw families living on mattresses in the streets. Refugees. Now, I don't know any more than that, but you think about how all of us in some respects are just a storm away. It sensitizes us, or it should. And we cannot take responsibility for every displaced person in the world, but I do believe we should be more sympathetic to all those who are displaced. My heart longed for my bed, my kitchen, the familiar smell of coffee in the morning, but most of all, just a place I could hang my hat and call home. We were lucky this time. Anybody want to disagree with that? We dodged a bullet. But what about those who were not so fortunate? Jesus' synopsis of the law and the prophets was very simple. Love God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Times like this remind us of the importance of that. But long before Jesus said that, there was another reminder that was offered up, and you all know this one. Maybe we can get the insurance to pay for that. Long before Jesus said, love God, love neighbor, someone else said, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's all about people. Us, them, we. So as we dodge a bullet, the question we leave the sanctuary must ask ourselves is, so what difference does all of this make? I think you are forever changed if you've been through this. You should be. I think you cannot help but be changed. So what change takes place? What will we do? As Christians and as a church, where does life take us now? Where will we go from here? Amen.